Quick historical overview. Massachusetts has had a medical use of marijuana program since approximately really up and running, say, 2013. Both the medical program and the adult program were put in place by ballot initiative. For any of you that reside in a state or do business in a state where a ballot initiative is the process by which regulation of cannabis may be coming to pass, please do your best to advocate for reasonable timelines, because in both the medical and the adult use cannabis implementation in Massachusetts, the legislators and the regulators were given a very, very short period of time to work with. And as you very thoughtful people know, that is not the best way to develop good policy. So here's a quick timeline for the adult process. There was a ballot initiative in November of 2016. The legislature had to amend the law that was put in place by the ballot petition because there were certain areas that were in conflict with the law. And while they were in there, they did some other things. And one of those other things was they created the Energy and Environmental Work Group, which Alex sat on together with me, and some representatives from the Department of Environmental Protection and the Department of Agriculture in Massachusetts. And as we go forward through this timeline, you'll see that the Energy and Environmental Work Group was working to try and get energy and efficiency standards into place as we were simultaneously building an independent agent. See, we don't sit in any other part of the Massachusetts government. We're a little balloon off to the side, so we had no existing infrastructure. And also licensing to get licensees up and running. And one of the things I'm sure those of you who work in the cannabis environment know is nothing related to this industry seems to go to plan. Something always goes sideways a little bit. And one of the examples of that is one of our first two licensees to open and commence operations November 20th, 2018. There is often a variable, no matter how much you plan for something, that throws off the result you're expecting. And in this case, it was that we had a lovely central location for one of our licensees in a town called Leicester that was very excited to have them open up. And we had done very careful study of their traffic plan, and we're excited to have them be one of our first licensees. So the week of Thanksgiving in November 2018, we allowed them to go forward, not realizing that the access road they were on was the only road to the local Walmart. Black Friday. Can you imagine the first licensee opening on the Eastern Seaboard was also located on the only road to the local Walmart on Black Friday? So if you saw the news coverage of that, you can imagine how that went. Here's a quick overview as to the type of licenses that we have in Massachusetts. So most of these are exactly what they sound like. You know, cultivation is exactly what you would think. Craft cooperatives is a cooperative structure for cultivation. Micro businesses are limited in size and they get breaks on fees. Product manufacturing is exactly what it sounds like. Retail is the actual selling to consumers. Research hasn't really gotten off the ground yet, but we're hoping to fill some of the gaps that we're hearing from people in various aspects of the industry where the federal government is not allowing them to move forward with research. We want to do what we can do, taking advantage of the great access we have in Massachusetts to folks that have labs, et cetera, as resources. Transporters are essentially a product of the farming community telling us that cultivators wanted to grow the plant, but they didn't necessarily want to have to drive it anywhere because it requires a very secure, expensive vehicle. And so we created a category where those who were investing in those vehicles could monetize their fleet by leasing them out, or you could have just an entirely independent transporting license where that's all you do. You don't otherwise touch the plant. Independent testing labs are the labs that assure us that what is in the cannabis is actually consistent with regulations. And we also just recently licensed delivery and social consumption. Social consumption is not likely to get off the ground in Massachusetts anytime soon because there is a legislative hitch that needs to be resolved before they can actually come to life. So that gives you an idea of the framework we're working with. So Here is the difference between the existing medical industry and the adult industry in Massachusetts. Medical, when it was implemented in 2013, is vertically integrated. So if you're a medical licensee in Massachusetts, you have all of these things. Delivery is optional, but you have cultivation, product manufacturing, retail, all under your corporate structure. Adult is more similar to mainstream products. You can choose to do any one of those things. On the medical side, hot tip, we are going to be going through a regulatory round in 2020. And that vertical integration may come off, and medical may be similar to adult. So if this is of interest to you, please stay tuned to the regulatory process in 2020. It'll likely get going in the spring. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. But things in Massachusetts are not done, not settled in terms of regulations. There's still one more regulatory round to go through. So here's our structure in terms of the day-to-day life of applying and receiving a license. So you have the application process. And you see highlighted there is management and operations profile. And the reason I'm highlighting it for you is that's where the energy and environmental compliance is going to come into play in a few slides. Once you go through the application process, you are granted a provisional license or denied one, who knows. If you are granted one, the next step for you is to file plans for an architectural review. We have to make sure what you're building out is actually compliant with our regulations. You will also have to go through local permits and licensing. So again, you see architectural review is highlighted in yellow, and that is because that is where we're going to be looking at your energy and environmental compliance. So you go through your final, which is essentially you've gotten your certificate of occupancy. You can, get all the inspections necessary to get to the next step, which is the notice to commence operations. That's the big deal. That's what you want in Massachusetts. You want that notice to commence operations, because that means in 3 days, you could actually be operational. And in terms of energy and environmental use there, we are going to have ongoing engagement with our compliance staff to make sure that you are keeping up to what you promised to do in your management and operations profile and your architectural review. When it comes to renewal, which is annual in Massachusetts, there will be environmental reporting using, and we'll get into this in a little more detail, the Cannabis Power Score. So again, thank you Resource Innovation Institute for that. As well as updating a compliance letter that I'll talk about in more detail in a moment. So again, this is all background. Talking about how we got to where we got to, the initial regulations were published in March of 2018, and that was where you first saw that 36 kilowatt standard, and there's a 50 kilowatt standard for smaller operators. After the initial regulations were put in place, and that was after quite a bit of public comment, I might add, and a public hearing, the working group convened and continued to have more public comment and invite more written comment from stakeholders, and had multiple meetings of the working group to discuss developing guidances and the best management practices. So then we got to 2019, and this was the first amendment regulatory round. Because we were initially so rushed in 2017 and 2018, we told everybody that we were going to have to reopen the regs again, and we ended up doing it twice, to address things that we just didn't have time to deal with in the first regulatory round. We needed time to flesh out those details. And energy and environment were one of the things that got tackled in March of 2019. So we published draft amended regulations, which sort of elaborated on other compliance pathways for energy and environmental issues, had public hearings, did a discussion of draft amended regulations, and they finally went into place November 1st, 2019. The reason I go through all that is to say that we didn't get a lot of public comment on the energy and environmental regulations. So one of the things I'm hoping to get out of this conference here today is pathways to make sure that you all know that we're doing this, because you all have valuable insight and perspective that we, especially this person who is a lawyer, not an energy and environmental person, we need to get your input. And if you don't even know the regulatory process is happening, we're not going to get it. So what I would like to do today is, if you've looked at our regulations, if you've looked at our guidance documents on the website, and you have questions because there's something that isn't quite clear to you, give me those questions. I probably can't answer them today, but what we are going to do is publish a rolling FAQ on our website that takes the questions from the cultivators, from the engineers, from the consultants, and tries to give you, as much guidance as we can about how to do this to the best ability for you and your clients. So the regulations are one thing. The guidance, how it works in Massachusetts, the guidance interprets the regulations and tells you what the regulators want to see in addition to the regulatory language itself. And then the best management practices are literally that, suggestions. And fear not those who are interested in that water use issue. We are going to amend our water use guidance. We did find out about the 6-gallon issue, and we are addressing it. So there are two methods of trying to encourage compliance. One is the carrot. This is our carrot. The Leadership Award essentially provides an opportunity to be recognized for your excellence in your work, your client's work, the licensee's work, in achieving energy and environmental goals. Now, this is not just a pretty sticker on your product or on your window. Look at the bottom language. These leadership ratings are taken into consideration. If your client gets in trouble for, who knows, something or another, improper waste disposal, as an example, we take the leadership rating into account when we're considering the fine that could get levied or license action like suspension or revocation. So this is not toothless. This is actually a big deal. So this is something clients want to aspire to. And again, this is something that may get tweaked in the 2020 regulatory updates. So partly because it needs to be updated to address one internal conflict, but partly because I'd like to have an opportunity to invite all of you who are more familiar with how this should work to give us some input. What would you like to see? If you were designing this yourself, what would you put? So make your voice heard. That was the carrot. Let's talk about the stick for a second. So we went over this framework earlier. If you submit an energy plan as part of your management operations profile that we do not think is compliant, what you're going to get is a request for information. Anyone familiar with the Massachusetts process? It's slow in terms of licensing. We were confined to a very small space for a very long period of time, and we couldn't hire enough staff to keep up with the volume of applications that we had. We're only just staffing up now. So you don't want an RFI. You want to get it right the first time, because an RFI can slow you down a month. And if your client has carrying costs that are significant because they're holding multiple properties, this is a significant expenditure to them. So definitely try to get it as right as you can the first time. Same concept at the architectural review phase. If we see something in the architectural review that does not seem like it's compliant, you could get a question. As part of ongoing engagement, our inspectors have the right to inspect your records anytime. So you could get a question if they see something there they don't think is correct. If we get to the renewal stage and we see that you're not compliant and you're supposed to be, you could get a condition on your license saying, okay, now you've only got 60 days, or there's going to be an issue. And then we have the option, obviously, of non-renewal, cease and desist orders, suspension, fines, so nothing that you want to deal with, nothing that your client wants to deal with. So these are the various regulatory themes we had to deal with as we were developing all of this. And I'm going to fly through the basic requirements. This is for everybody but cultivators, because this is really an indoor agriculture conference, and you don't really need to focus on the people who aren't cultivating. But I wanted to get the information out there in addition to what we have in our guidances posted online. So again, essentially the process here is to get people engaged and try to get them to really consider energy efficiency options. And you'll see this throughout. Again, renewables, have you thought about whether or not you can use renewables? Have you examined your demand and what you can do to reduce it? And then have you engaged in dealing with the energy efficiency programs. We have Mass Save in Massachusetts, and they're amazing. So to the extent you can work with them, please do. Transporters and delivery, they have a different set of criteria, so we're going to deal with them differently from other kind of license types and other kind of cultivators. Cultivators, we've already talked about data. But this, again, is more detailed on the prior slide. So we want to get an energy plan that shows that you're being thoughtful and really getting ready to operate in an energy efficient way. So you're going to be submitting as part of the architectural review process an energy compliance letter or an energy compliance exemption letter and a third-party safety certification. So these are the folks that need to fill out that letter. For most people, it's going to be a professional engineer, a registered architect, but there are two other options for the smaller operators or someone who demonstrates there's a reason they need to use someone else. The one exception is that HVAC and dehumidification requirements do need to be done by a mechanical engineer or a professional engineer with a license that covers mechanical engineering. So it's relatively straightforward information that you need, and again, it is literally demonstrating compliance in a way that is relatively easy for you, relatively easy for us, so there doesn't need to be a lot of gray area. So these are the things that are getting the most questions now, and in fact, we even saw questions on social media where folks are starting to talk to each other about how to measure compliance with this. That's fine, but I would also suggest that you make sure those questions are coming into the commission, because we want to make sure that the conversation is happening with us, not without us, because we're the ones that will make the decision whether or not what you're submitting is compliant. Here's some additional information with regard to that with the HLPD requirements. And then here is what came out of the 2019 amendments, which is our partnership with the Design Lights Consortium and their ability to provide information to applicants and licensees about equipment that will be deemed to be compliant as long as it meets the requirements. And they've built out a filter in their software, which is much appreciated. And I think will be wonderful for especially our smaller operators to be able to determine compliance. Here's additional information regarding that energy compliance letter and what needs to be submitted with it. Again, on the HVAC side, and then moving forward to eye safety. Protection of the workers is very important. This is becoming an emerging issue for regulators, in case you're not aware. The concern that cannabis workers are not being adequately protected by the industry. So hot tip from the regulator space, pay attention to these issues, because I think you're going to hear increasing volume on them in the coming months and years. The energy compliance exemption letter is the one that talks about why you don't need to be compliant with the HLPD or the HQPL because you are generating 80% or more from a renewable generating source or renewable thermal generation. And here under, this is set by Massachusetts law. And here's what we'll expect to see in that energy compliance exemption letter. On renewal, this is where the Cannabis Power Score comes in. So we're going to collect the data about your energy consumption, your water consumption, on-site energy generation, and cannabis yield by weight, thanks to our partnership on the Cannabis Power Score, and review that as part of renewal. I'm sure you're all familiar with the Cannabis Power Score software, but here it is. Now, some of the folks that are going to be coming into compliance have already gone through, they're already operating, so they haven't done the architectural review process yet. If that applies to you or your client, the renewal deadline becomes significant, because this is the first time you're going to be supplying that energy compliance or energy compliance exemption letter. If you aren't in operation yet, you will do that as part of the architectural review process. But if you're already up and running, this is the point where you're going to be submitting that in addition to providing the Cannabis Power Score report. So the deadline for existing operators to become compliant with all of this is July 1st, 2020. And we've provided an option for a further 6-month extension for certain folks if they agree to complete a comprehensive survey regarding their energy and environmental impacts. And the report will be due on October 1st, and an update will be due on, it's actually January 4th. We figured out January 2nd is a Sunday. Don't worry, no one has to do it on Sunday. But what we are trying to do is address the theme that we heard earlier today. More data needed, more data needed, more data needed. This is a different kind of baseline than what Nick was referring to earlier, but it is a very comprehensive, I think 50 questions that goes into all the equipment that you're using, what kind of, and again, this is a big debate what word to use, but we ended up using strains. Everyone can yell at me at dinner, I know. But it's a lot of really nerdy, weedy details that we think are important to gather and that we intend ultimately to publish on, goodness me. Yeah, 420 would be hilarious, but no. You know, I'll make that suggestion. How about that? 420, 2021. But we intend to publish that on our open data platform. So if you're not familiar with our open data platform, Massachusetts is really dedicated to getting data and research out there for government agencies, for consultants, for whoever to use, for academics to use, because we can obviously gather a lot of information. We're in this great position of being able to gather all of this information, but we don't want to hoard it and keep it to ourselves because it's important for the states that are coming online, the countries that are coming online, to have some idea of what they're getting themselves into and what is going to come out of this industry legalizing in their community. So we want to make this information as available as we possibly can, and that will include the survey information that we get off the energy extension report. So bottom line, and the things that I want you to take away from this are, one, let's find a way to better engage with each other because I want to hear a lot more information coming to the regulators in the 2020 round. And I would encourage you not only to engage with Massachusetts, but we all know, we have other states coming online, and you have an opportunity to get in on the ground floor in all these states that are considering legalizing cannabis and doing it in an energy responsible way. And the only way they're going to be able to do that sensibly and in a way that's data-driven is if they hear from you. So you can start with me and tell me all the questions you have about Massachusetts so I can take it back to my team and then throw it up on our website. But I would also encourage you to do that with other states. And let's face it, we've got federal officials that are probably looking at this and trying to figure out going down the road, depending on what happens with the election, what we're going to do on a federal level. So we need to make sure that they're informed about how to do this in an energy efficient way, because we're hearing that candidates are rolling out these legalization plans. But in my view, any of these plans, whether you're a state official or a federal official or in another country, if you're not addressing energy and environmental impacts in these plans, your legalization plan is not yet complete. So please join me. Get in touch with them, get in touch with me, and let's all see if we can do this together in an energy efficient way. And that's it.